An 84-year-old woman had dinner with her family on a Saturday night. She was driven home by her son-in-law. He waited in the driveway until she was safely inside. The garage door closed at 9:50 p.m. And somewhere between that moment and sunrise, she vanished from her own home. And a car that investigators publicly said had been processed and cleared is still sitting in an evidence lot with no explanation. Welcome back to Cold Case History. I am going to walk you through every detail of this case: the footage, the forensics, the suspect behavior, the DNA, and the digital evidence trail. If you are new here, subscribe now and hit the notification bell. We cover every update on cases like this one the moment they break. And trust me, this one is not finished breaking yet. Let's begin at the beginning. January 31st was a Saturday. According to the official timeline released by the Pima County Sheriff's Department, according to statements made at press conferences, and according to what the family has described publicly, it was an unremarkable evening. Nancy Guthrie arrived at her daughter Annie's house at 5:32 in the afternoon. Annie Guthrie is Nancy's eldest daughter. Annie is married to a man named Tommaso Cioni, a 50-year-old Italian-born educator who has lived and worked in Tucson for years, teaching 6th grade and AP biology. Before the night of January 31st, Tommaso Cioni had no profile in this story. He was a husband, a father, a son-in-law who appeared in Christmas photos in matching pajamas like every other member of every other family that posts things online and means nothing by it. That Saturday, the three of them shared dinner at Annie and Tommaso's home. They ate. They played games. The evening wound down the way ordinary family evenings do. And when it was time for Nancy to go home, Tommaso drove her. At 9:48 p.m., his car pulled into the driveway of Nancy Guthrie's home in the Catalina foothills, a quiet suburb northeast of Tucson. Investigators confirmed through their review of the available timeline evidence that Tommaso did not drop her at the curb and pull away. He waited. He stayed in that driveway until Nancy was through the door and the garage closed behind her. That happened at 9:50 p.m. The Pima County Sheriff's Department used that garage door timestamp to mark the last confirmed moment Nancy Guthrie was home, safe, and accounted for. Tommaso Cioni drove away. It is worth pausing there. In any investigation involving a missing person, the behavior of the last individual to see the victim gets examined at the finest level of detail. And the behavior documented here, a man who stayed in the driveway until his mother-in-law was safely inside before driving away, is not the behavior that appears in cases where the final driver had any intention of returning. Law enforcement noted it. It was included in the official public timeline. It is part of the record, and it is part of why the early media speculation naming Tommaso as a prime suspect drew such a direct and pointed response from the sheriff's office. What happened after that garage door came down is what the entire investigation has been working to reconstruct. At 1:47 in the morning on February 1st, the doorbell camera at Nancy's home went offline. Her pacemaker application stopped syncing with her phone at 2:28 a.m., a digital interruption in the otherwise silent night of an 84-year-old woman who should have been sleeping. By Sunday morning, when Nancy didn't appear at St. Philip's in the Hills Episcopal Church, a friend reached out to the family. Her children went to check on her. She was not there. The Pima County Sheriff's Department received a welfare check request around noon on February 1st. Officers arrived at 12:15 p.m. What they found was not a woman who had wandered off or gone somewhere without telling anyone. It was a crime scene. Blood on the porch, forensically confirmed to belong to Nancy Guthrie. Evidence that she had been taken from her own home, against her will, in the hours before dawn while Tucson slept around her. Here is the first thing this case asks you to hold on to, because we will return to it. The moment investigators established that crime scene on the afternoon of February 1st, the last person confirmed to have seen Nancy Guthrie was the man who drove her home the night before. That man is Tommaso Cioni. That is not an accusation. That is a fact of sequence. And in a criminal investigation, sequence determines where you begin. It determines whose phone you request, whose computer, whose car. We will come back to the car. When law enforcement processes a kidnapping scene, the first question is always the same. Who was the last person with the victim? That individual becomes the anchor of the timeline. Everything connected to them, everywhere they were, every piece of physical evidence in their orbit, all of it becomes material. Tommaso Cioni was that anchor. Not because investigators believed he had done something, but because the protocol of a serious criminal investigation does not wait for belief. It collects. It preserves. It eliminates. You do not build a case by holding back until guilt is obvious. You build a case by working outward from the last known safe moment of the person who disappeared. Within the early days of the investigation, the exact date has not been made public. Investigators approached Annie Guthrie and Tommaso Cioni and asked for their consent to examine the vehicle. They did not go to a judge. They did not petition for a search warrant. They did not establish probable cause before a court. They asked, and the answer was yes. That detail, the consent, is central to understanding everything that came after it. But the car was not the only thing investigators examined. The sheriff would later confirm this publicly in an interview with local Tucson news. Phones were taken. Computers were taken. Their home was processed. Their vehicle was processed. That is a comprehensive forensic engagement with two people. That is not a brief conversation followed by a handshake. Phones, computers, vehicles, homes. Each of those items carries its own forensic history, its own record of location and contact and proximity, and every piece of it was surrendered voluntarily. The FBI joined the investigation by February 2nd. Agents were on the ground in Tucson. Doorbell footage was being analyzed. A ransom note was being studied. Surveillance networks were being queried. By February 5th, the sheriff held a full press conference and released a detailed timeline of Nancy's disappearance. The case had gone national. The name Nancy Guthrie was being reported from London to Lagos. And somewhere in the middle of all of that, Annie and Tommaso's car sat in an evidence lot while forensic technicians who had been given the keys voluntarily worked through whatever they found inside it. Here is what the public record has never addressed. What specifically did investigators find in that vehicle? What were they looking for? What did the examination produce? The sheriff has never answered those questions from a podium. The Pima County Sheriff's Department has not addressed them in any public statement. What was confirmed by a CBS 5 journalist on February 27th is that the car was still in evidence. Still there. Still officially part of the investigation. More than a month after Nancy disappeared and 11 days after the sheriff cleared the family entirely. We are going to sit inside that gap right now, because the gap is the case. If you're still here, subscribe, because cases like this only work when people stay and tell us where you're watching from. I love seeing my global family represent. Drop your country or city in the comments. On February 16th, Sheriff Chris Nanos did not hold a formal press conference. He spoke to KOD 13 News, the local Tucson NBC affiliate. And what he said was not hedged. It was not careful law enforcement language designed to preserve flexibility. It was a declaration. His exact words as reported and confirmed on February 16th, 2026. Not one single person in the family is a suspect. So I am telling everyone effective today, you guys need to knock it off. People are hurting. They are victims. I am saying they are clear. We have cleared them. Read those words again carefully. We have cleared them. Past tense. Completed. Not we are still in the process of evaluating. Not we have found nothing against them at this time. He said the work is done, the conclusion has been reached, and these people are not suspects. He then described what that conclusion was based on. They talked to them. They took their phones. They took their computers. They processed their vehicles. They processed their homes. He followed the spoken statement with a written formal statement issued to reinforce it. The written statement read that the Guthrie family, to include all siblings and spouses, had been cleared as possible suspects in the case. That the family had been cooperative and gracious and were victims. That to suggest otherwise was not only wrong, it was cruel. All siblings and spouses. That language is not a coincidence. A law enforcement professional knows the difference between saying immediate family and saying all siblings and spouses. The sheriff chose the broader, more deliberately inclusive language to close the door on speculation about Annie, about Tommaso, about every person connected to Nancy by blood or by marriage. They are clear. They are victims. To suggest otherwise is wrong, and it is cruel. And the car was still in the evidence lot. Now, there are people who will say that this is not a contradiction. That processing a vehicle and retaining a vehicle are not mutually exclusive. That the car could have been examined for evidence against the family while still being held because it contains material relevant to the broader investigation. And those people are not entirely wrong. But they are also not engaging honestly with what the sheriff said specifically on February 16th. He did not say the vehicle had been looked at. He said it had been processed, and he offered that processing as completed evidence of the family's clearance. If the vehicle is still part of the investigation after it was presented as processed and closed, the public deserves an accounting of what changed, or what was incomplete, or what was found. That accounting has not arrived. The most significant analysis on this point came from Jennifer Coffendafer. Coffendafer is a retired FBI special agent with 28 years of field experience. She was a SWAT team member. She now contributes to News Nation as a crime analyst and runs a YouTube channel called Break the Case with Jen Coffendafer FBI, where she covers major cases with the kind of forensic fluency that only comes from nearly 3 decades of building them from the inside. On March 1st, Coffendafer published a video specifically about the car, and she opened it by saying something that very few analysts covering this case had said out loud. She said the fact that the vehicle was taken by consent rather than by warrant is not a red flag against the family. It is the opposite. Her words were direct. Their searches have been consent searches. In other words, law enforcement didn't have any probable cause to believe they were involved. They got consent. If they had probable cause, I could tell you this as an FBI agent. If I have probable cause, I'm not going to get consent. Why would I use consent when I know that in a court of law it's going to be argued that the person was coerced? Let that settle for a moment. A 28-year FBI veteran is telling you that if investigators believed Annie or Tommaso had committed a crime, they would not have asked permission to take the car. They would have gone before a judge and gotten a warrant. The fact that they asked, and the family immediately said yes, is the procedural signal that points toward innocence rather than guilt. So why is the car still there? Coffin Dafer had a theory for that as well, and it is not the one circulating in online forums. She asked a series of questions in that video that reframed the car entirely. Is it possible that Nancy was tracked from Annie and Tommaso's house? Is it possible a tracker was placed on that vehicle? Is it possible that someone interfaced with that car and that investigators are now examining it for fingerprints, for DNA, for a device placed there by someone else without the knowledge of the people who owned it? Think carefully about what that means. If whoever abducted Nancy Guthrie had been surveilling her movements in advance, if they had been watching her patterns, tracking her schedule, waiting for the precise conditions they needed, one of the most efficient ways to know where she was and exactly when she would arrive home alone would be to attach a GPS tracking device to the car of the family she spent time with. They would have known she was at Annie's that evening. They would have known Tommaso was driving her home. They would have known exactly when to be in position. And that level of preparation, that kind of premeditated, methodical surveillance, the kind that requires physically accessing someone else's property without their awareness, is not the signature of an opportunistic criminal. It is the signature of someone with a plan. Someone who had identified Nancy Guthrie as a target and had been building toward this moment long before January 31st arrived. The FBI suspect profile supports exactly that level of sophistication. The masked figure captured on the doorbell camera arrived at Nancy's home in the early morning hours of February 1st wearing gloves, wearing a ski mask, carrying a holster with a weapon, and carrying a specific 25-liter Ozark Trail hiking backpack. That is not improvised. That is a person who knew where they were going, knew what they needed, and had been ready long before they arrived. A GPS tracker placed on Annie and Tommaso's vehicle without their knowledge would fit that profile with precision. It would be one step in a sequence of preparation taken by someone who had been watching this family long enough to understand when the window would open. That reframes the car entirely. It moves it from the category of incriminating to the category of victimized. Annie and Tommaso did not use that car to harm anyone. Someone else may have used it, without their knowledge, without their consent, without them ever knowing it was being used at all, to help execute the worst night their family has ever experienced. The car sitting in that evidence lot may be the closest physical evidence investigators currently have to the mind of the person who planned this crime. That is why it stays. That is why the sheriff cleared the family and kept the car. Not because those two facts are in conflict, but because they are describing two entirely different parts of the same story. The car may not be evidence of what the family did. It may be the single most important piece of evidence pointing to what was done to them. Former FBI agent Maureen O'Connell, speaking on Megyn Kelly's program on February 27th, the same day the CBS 5 report confirmed the car was still in evidence, said the continued hold was highly unusual and that it defied standard protocol for a family that had been this publicly, this completely, and this formally cleared. Two retired federal agents. One says the consent-based nature of the cooperation points toward innocence. One says the continued retention after clearance is highly unusual. Both are telling you the same thing from slightly different angles. What is happening with that car does not fit neatly into any standard procedure, and the people with the authority to explain it have not been made to. On March 3rd, Sheriff Chris Nanos spoke to NBC News. He said investigators were definitely closer to identifying a suspect. He said he had full faith and full confidence his team was going to solve this. He said he personally believed Nancy Guthrie was alive. He did not mention the car. He did not address the 11-day gap between the family's clearance and the CBS 5 report confirming the vehicle was still in evidence. He did not explain what forensic analysis remained incomplete or when a car belonging to a publicly cleared family would be returned to them. He talked about leads. He talked about progress. He talked about hope. The car sat in the evidence lot. Now let us be precise about what this analysis is and is not claiming. We are not claiming that Tommaso Cioni or Annie Guthrie are responsible for what happened to Nancy Guthrie. The sheriff has cleared them. A 28-year FBI veteran has explained why the consent-based nature of their cooperation points away from guilt rather than toward it. DNA recovered from a glove found near Nancy's home did not match any family member. The evidence, as it currently exists in the public record, does not implicate the family. What we are identifying is something more specific and more important and more uncomfortable to sit with. The Pima County Sheriff's Department has made two public statements that have not been reconciled. The first, the family was cleared and their vehicles were processed, stated February 16th. The second, the vehicle is still part of the investigation, stated February 27th, 11 days apart. Same institution. No explanation bridging the two. No journalist has stood at a podium and forced that reconciliation. No press conference has addressed it. The sheriff has not been asked on camera to explain what the word processed means in the context of a vehicle that remained in evidence weeks after it was held up as evidence of closure. That is the question this analysis exists to ask. And here is why it matters beyond this one car and this one family. When law enforcement makes a clearance statement as definitive as the one made on February 16th, when a sheriff looks into cameras and says, not one single person in the family is a suspect. We have cleared them. They are victims. The public has a reasonable expectation that the physical evidence associated with that clearance follows the same logic. You cleared the people, you return the property. That is how institutional credibility is built and maintained. That is how the public is supposed to be able to read official statements and trust that the words mean what they appear to mean. When the property is not returned, when 11 days later the same institution confirms the vehicle is still part of the investigation with no further elaboration, it creates a gap. Not necessarily a gap that implicates the family. Not necessarily a gap that suggests deception or corruption within the investigation. But a gap the public cannot close on its own with the information it has been given. A gap that drives speculation. A gap that sends people in 20 directions at once, some of them aimed at innocent people, all of them filling a vacuum that should have been filled by a clear and honest explanation of what is happening with that car and why. The antidote to reckless speculation is not a rebuke of the people speculating. It is a press conference that answers the question. That press conference has not happened. And the question matters not just to the family whose car it is, not just to the people trying to find out where their mother is, but to every person following this case who is trying to build a coherent picture of what actually happened on the night of January 31st. The car is a piece of that picture. It may be the piece that tells investigators how the abductor knew Nancy was coming home that night. It may identify the route they used. It may carry a fingerprint, a DNA trace, a GPS device, something the person who took Nancy Guthrie left behind without realizing they left it. Or it may contain something else entirely, something the sheriff's department has deliberately chosen not to address in any public communication about this case. Either way, the car is not a footnote. It is not a loose procedural end that will resolve itself quietly in a press release. It is a centrally unaddressed, officially confirmed piece of a federal kidnapping investigation. And the institution holding it has offered 6 words of public explanation in more than 30 days. The vehicle is still part of the investigation. 6 words for a car that connects the last confirmed safe moment of an 84-year-old woman to the night she was taken from her own home. 6 words for a car that was cited by the same sheriff as evidence of cooperation and clearance. 6 words for a vehicle that a 28-year FBI veteran believes may carry the forensic trace of the person who planned this abduction. The investigation is, according to the sheriff himself, moving closer to a suspect. That means the forensic work being conducted on the gloves found near the home, on the doorbell footage, on the DNA, on the range of vehicles being held and examined, is producing results. The net is tightening in whatever direction it is tightening. And when the answer finally breaks publicly, when investigators name a suspect and build a case for trial, one of the first questions that will be answered in front of a judge is, what was in that car, and what did it tell you? We do not have that answer. But the question is on the record, and it is not going anywhere. The sheriff said the family is cleared. The evidence lot says the car is still there. 11 days between those two statements. No explanation offered. No question demanded from a podium. Jennifer Coffendafer, 28 years inside the FBI, says the consent search is evidence that no probable cause was ever established against this family. Says the car may carry the forensic signature of someone else's planning. Says this is evidence of a crime committed against the family, not by them. Her reading of the evidence points toward a perpetrator who was methodical, prepared, and watching long before the night of January 31st arrived. Nancy Guthrie is 84 years old. She requires daily medication. She has been gone for more than a month. She is somebody's mother. She is somebody's grandmother. She is a woman who spent her last safe evening having dinner with the people she loved most. And she deserves to come home. Somewhere in a Pima County evidence lot, the car that drove her home on that last ordinary Saturday night is sitting under fluorescent light, holding whatever it holds, waiting for someone with the authority and the will to make it speak. That car is the question. The empty podium is the answer that has not come. If you know anything, if you saw anything, if someone said something to you that has not left your mind since, call 1-800-CALL-FBI. One call could bring Nancy home. And if this video reached you, don't let it stop here. Share it right now with every person you know who is following this case. Send it to the Reddit threads, the Facebook groups, the group chats. This analysis needs to reach the people asking the right questions. Subscribe to Cold Case History so you don't miss a single update the moment it breaks. Hit the bell. Leave your theory in the comments below, because the comment section on this channel is where this case gets examined at the depth it deserves. We are covering this case until it is solved, until Nancy is home, until the question of that car gets the answer it deserves. We are not going anywhere, and neither should you. Subscribe now. We will see you in the next one.